Ian Henderson, welcome to Spotlight Interviews. Thank you very much for coming on the call.
Thanks for inviting me, Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Why don't we just start with you telling us a little bit about your business and what you do and how long you've been doing it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I started in business when I was a fairly young man, just after leaving college. So that's many years ago. In fact, I was reflecting recently, it must be 50 years ago nearly when I started in business. So that was a kind of van and driver business, and then into road haulage, and since then into UK property. And now the main focus of the business is residential property development in Kenya and East Africa.
Wow. Okay. So, and what have been your what's been your experience in working in East Africa since you set up there? Like what?
Well, it's interesting. It's a very different kind of business environment. You know, good enough. I was set for it in a way. I started working in Africa in the mid-80s when I was in road haulage, and I went to work for Save the Children in Sudan and then Ethiopia, and then I worked in Angola and Mozambique. So I've worked in Africa a fair bit. And I suppose if anybody's thinking of going to Africa, I would say Kenya's a fairly soft entry point. So it's easier than many of the other countries. But nevertheless, you know, it's different. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of corruption around, and you know, people, even my own people, find it difficult to draw the line between what's an appreciation and what's corruption. So that's one of the difficult things to grapple with, almost on a daily, certainly weekly basis.
So, what would have been one of your biggest learnings since you set up business over there, or since you've had to work in a different business culture?
Probably that it's good to just sit back and take a look at the problem that's in front of you and try and figure a way through it, you know, without a kind of knee-jerk reaction or like, this is the way to go, let's go this way, we'll sort it out. Maybe easier to do that in a developed country area, but in Africa and Kenya, you know, got to think, right, okay, what's going to work, what's not going to work, because sometimes it's not just straight lines, you know, sometimes it's working around the problem and maybe calling somebody or getting some advice on something, or finding somebody that's been in that position before, and then figure out the way to go, you know, not to be in too much of a hurry to solve the problem, but just try and get there eventually.
In a previous life, I spent a lot of time working in India and selling computer technology in India. And one of the things we found was communication was difficult. And I don't mean the language, it was English. But when we say something, we might mean something different. And we actually had to learn what they mean when they say something. Have you found the same thing working in Kenya? Or working?
Yeah, sure. No, I know exactly what you mean. I've never actually been to India. I quite fancy one of these days. But in Kenya, for sure. I mean, it's just a different culture. You know, for example, we manage the estates that we build, and there's a service charge, and at the early days we collected the service charge, and then we spent it on security, landscaping, all of these things. And at one particular AGM, you know, it was said to me, and look, we know you'll be stealing some of this service charge, but just don't steal too much of it, you know. And you know, I was quite insulted for a while to think that I'd steal some relatively small money, but that's the culture, you know. And it wasn't meant by way of an insult. It was meant to be an information rather than an insult. And you just got to try and figure out, you know, what the meaning of things is.
So, what are your aspirations for the company in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, you know, it's a reasonable sized family business at the moment, and I'm moving towards winding down. So, good enough, we appointed a young, energetic CEO a couple of years ago, and he's written a 5-year plan. And we had aspirations to go public at one time and almost made it, but not quite. So Shiv, who's our CEO, his plan is to attract some institutional investment into the business, and we'll dispose of some family shareholding, and then leave Shiv to build an empire.
You mentioned a 5-year plan. How important is it to you to have an actual long-term, medium to long-term plan?
I think it's important, Andy. You know, in fact, for me, you know, I mean, I'm kind of old school. You know, I've got a diary book, and I write down tasks every morning, and I write down the easiest ones first, so that when I start ticking them off, I feel motivated. So I do a daily plan, a weekly plan, a monthly plan, and certainly a long-term plan. The plans don't always pan out. Quite often they go adrift, but you know, I think it's good to have something to help direct your thoughts and direct the business. And then if it starts to go offline somewhere, then you say, okay, fine, we'll change direction and we'll do something else. But you know, I would advise anybody in business to work along these lines, maybe digitally writing off rather than the diary book.
Well, okay, so this may feed into my next question then, which was for those people who are going to watch this, who are being run ragged at the moment, working weekends, working nights, and checking their emails on their holidays. How do you balance your personal life with the demands of running? Well, I was going to say running a business, but you run more than one business. So, how do you balance your personal life with the demands of running multiple businesses?
I think I've always been lucky, you know. I always separated family from business. I don't check my emails on my phone. I don't work from the house unless it's an exception. And if I've taken time off, I take time off, and people can wait for me to get back to them. And I've kind of always done that because it suits me. And I think everybody's different. You know, I'm sure it suits some people to check emails every few minutes and so on. But I separate them both, and I think I've been reasonably good at it over the years because I tend to I'm able to switch off, and I think that's important. You know, I mean, I love business, which I think is a big plus, but I think it's also important to separate business from other parts of your life.
I remember somebody once said, when you're at work, be fully at work. When you're on holiday, be fully on holiday.
Perfect.
When you're
Yeah,
with your family, be fully with your family.
yeah, exactly. I mean that sums it up. So, yeah.
What would you say to anyone thinking of going into business for themselves?
I would say go into business for yourself because it's great. But you know what? It's not for everybody. So, you know, try and figure out as much as possible what it involves, you know, what going into business involves, where it's going to take you, particularly in the early years. And if you can rationalize about that and then decide whether or not to do it, because it isn't for everybody. You know, it's tough. Responsibilities, particularly if you're employing a few people. It's not for everybody, but if it is for you, it can be tremendously enjoyable and satisfying.
I guess you never really know if it's for you until you give it a go.
That's right, and in which case, if in doubt, do it, because don't get to a certain age and look back and say, well, you know, I had the chance to go into business for myself, and I'm sorry I didn't. You know, I like kind of people reinventing themselves, doing different things in life. You know, I've tried to change course a few times because you don't want to be looking back when you're getting to your twilight years and saying, well, I had a chance to go into business, but I didn't take it. And that's a regret. Going into business and even failing isn't a regret. You know, that's just an experience.
Yeah, you're going to regret it if you don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
yeah.
on that note, then, what would be the best advice you would give to your 18-year-old self? I know it wasn't that long ago. So, or what would you do? You know, what would you tell your 18-year-old self to do different if you had to start over?
Andy, we've not got a long enough interview time for that, let me tell you. every day, I'm learning things that I wish I knew. But maybe one of the main things would be to be more collaborative and to listen more and to network more and to take on board other people's views and opinions and advices, you know, because I didn't do that. I probably still don't do it as much as I should, but I do it a hell of a lot more than I did when I was 18. So that would be for sure. But then you've got to balance that between saying, right, okay, I'm my own man. Am I going to do it my own way, or am I going to just listen to people and just follow a script, you know? But I think certainly networking and doing things in a more collaborative and joined up way would be advice I would give.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can listen to everybody, but ultimately you still need to make the decision.
Yeah.
The outcome of that decision is still going to rest on you, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're going to put the balance in your favor, I guess you got to surround yourself with competent, good people. So you're listening.
Well, that's a great point as well. Be careful about who you do surround yourself with, because you you know, in the early days particularly, you do depend on advice, and it's pretty important to be getting advice from sound people, and not people that give bad advice or lead you in the wrong direction. So I think it's a bit like, you know, having your children network their friends. Who are they friends with? You know, they're friends with good people, and they move in the right circles, you know, and it's the same in business, you know, to move in the right circles, to you know, spend a bit more on professional advice from time to time, and get the right sound advice that you can depend on.
Brilliant. Well, Ian, look, you know, lots to take away for people that are thinking about going into business or are already in business. You know, you've got a lot of years of experience doing lots of different things in lots of different countries. So it's been really, really interesting to hear your story and get your views. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Not at all, Andy, not at all. Thanks for asking, and say it's been a pleasure.